Hello, Clive. Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I hope that all of us, we had a very nice evening yesterday. Now we are going to start our official work with the Eurofound's forum. First, Mr. Minister for the Social Protection, Rural Development and the Geldtacht, Minister Calieri, Madam Vice President of the European Commission, Mizzato, ladies and gentlemen, you are very welcome to our Foundation Forum, which is usually organized every 4 years. This time we anticipated by 1 year, so in order to make it a part of our events related to the 50th anniversary of the agency. And this is very much why we chose also the title of the forum, which is the European social model as a factor of the European competitiveness. Yesterday I had the chance to quote a resolution of the then European Economic Communities that gave the birth of our agency 50 years ago. And it was the link exactly between economic growth, at that time they were calling it economic expansion, and the social model. At that time they were calling it to reduce disparities. The European Economic Communities was of 6 member states at that time, back in 1972. So the link between economic growth and a cohesion society and the social model has always been a part of the DNA of Eurofound since the creation of the agency. This is not that this is a trendy word now, everybody speaks about competitiveness, let's see how we can fit into that. No. And this is actually the model that we have in Europe. This is what makes Europe attractive to foreign workers, to foreign talents. That's what makes it attractive also for many people to work and live and create value on our continent. I don't say that everything is fine. Of course, all these priorities now that we have in Europe about supporting the growth, supporting the competitiveness are absolutely timely. We are living in a world where Europe needs really to adapt very quickly to that. But what we would say at Eurofound, based on our very objective and factual research, is that this is not a zero-sum game. I mean, the economic growth and the social model and the social transfer are not necessarily a zero-sum game. You can have both developing or both deteriorating. And we have some very hard figures, and if you had the time and the chance to open the background paper for the forum, which was drafted by my colleagues, led by Massimiliano Mascherini, you're going to see a number of facts proving that, not only coming from Eurofound's research, but coming from Eurostat, from the European Investment Bank, from different institutions. You would eventually see that the cost of inaction for the women outside of the labor market is about 400 billion euro per year, or 2% of Europe's GDP. So theoretically, and that's quite a conservative estimate. So if, not possible all of them, but if more women are able to work and willing to work and not do other things that prevent them from being active on the labor market, that has a huge cost. Same goes for the young people, for the so-called needs. The cost is about 100 billion per year. So this is the cost if we do nothing. If we say, oh, these guys should have some kind of interest to come back to the labor market. Let's wait for that. No, if we do nothing, if there are no policies for that, then it comes at a cost. And certainly this is not helping the growth and the development. Same could go, and we could get figures for the school meals or for the help for people that are in the dire situations with vulnerabilities, being with disability or with other problems, including mental health problems, etc., etc. So wise and smart social investments are indeed an integral part not only of the European social model, but also an integral part of the growth factors that we could use in Europe, and we have lots of evidence about that. This is what the forum is going to be about. I mean, I know that we might hear, and this is the purpose of it, we might hear different opinions on these things. That's why for the forum we mostly invited people not to listen to our research, but that we listen to the stakeholders. And I'm very thankful to all of you who are taking part in the forum, but also in particular to the speakers to the forum that come from different walks of life. I mean, from employer side, from the worker side, from governments, from academia. And I'm very much looking for an intense but very interesting discussion this morning for our forum. And in order to kickstart this discussion, I have the pleasure to announce the first speaker. Actually, we had a flavor of his thought yesterday. And this is somebody who shows what is in common between King's College in London, Oxford University, Stanford University, and this is Daniel Susskind. He's academic, he's writer, he's economist in all these academic, very renowned institutions, and he's one of the leading authors in terms of what happens with the digitalization of our life and the world. And yesterday, I mean, I think myself, I would be very much interested to continue the discussion with him. But I'm sure that today we are going to have this time. So we shall start with an address, a lecture by Daniel Susskind, and then we shall have the time for questions and answers. Then, to give you a little bit an idea about the order today, then we expect the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland, to come and address our forum. Afterwards, we are going to have a short coffee break, which is going to take place here in the room, and the coffee is going to be served here. And then we shall resume with our speakers, Vice President Mințatu. Then we are going to break into 3 panels that are going to be moderated by my colleagues in research at Eurofound. And then we are going to come back for an address by the chair of the Employment Committee in the European Parliament, Lee Anderson, and for the final panel, which is also going to be very interesting. So this is the program for today, and without further ado, I suggest that we start it. So I would invite Professor Susskind to come to the stage, and I would also invite Mary McCaughey, who is our head of communication. I understand that she would come afterwards, but she's going to moderate the Q&A session with Daniel Susskind. So I disappear from the stage and I give it to somebody who can tell us very interesting things. Daniel, please.
Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction. It's a great pleasure to be with you all again this morning. And this morning I want to talk about growth, economic growth. And I want to dive straight in. 3 facts, simple but really remarkable, have defined the economic history of human beings until now. The first is that for most of the 300,000 years that human beings have been around, economic life was essentially stagnant. So whether you were a hunter-gatherer laboring away in the Stone Age or somebody working at the start of the Industrial Revolution, although your lives would have differed in lots of different respects, fundamentally, from an economic point of view, it would have looked remarkably similar, an unforgiving, relentless struggle for subsistence. The second remarkable economic fact is that this stagnation only very recently came to an end. Modern economic growth began just 200, 300 years ago. And the third fact is that somehow we have managed to maintain this economic ascent. Now, as time has passed, we've used this extraordinary material prosperity to achieve remarkable outcomes, freeing billions from the struggle for subsistence that haunted our ancestors, making the average human life far longer, far healthier than ever before, funding discoveries that have transformed our understanding of the world, splitting the atom, cracking the genetic code, starting to explore the stars. But this pursuit of prosperity has also come at an enormous price. The destruction of the natural environment, the desolation of particular local places and communities, the emergence of vast inequalities between those who have a share in this prosperity and those who do not, the creation of new technologies like AI that have disruptive effects on work and on politics, it's not clear yet we can properly control. And so growth presents us with a dilemma. On the one hand, it's associated with almost every measure of human flourishing, but on the other hand, it's also associated with many of the greatest challenges that we face today as well. It feels like we're being pulled in two opposite directions at the same time. And this is what I want to explore with you this morning. The first is I want to share a few insights on the surprisingly recent history of the idea of economic growth. My starting point is going to be that we desperately need more economic growth, and I want to set out the importance of discovering new ideas in driving economic growth. But if we were to simply plow on in pursuit of more growth alone, we would be making the same mistake as those that came before, focusing too much on the promise of growth, ignoring the tremendous price. And so I also want to explore some thoughts on how we might pursue a different type of growth. And then I want to close by raising the question, what do we do if we cannot, particularly in the short run, change the nature of growth, where we face a tension between the pursuit of growth and other things that we might value and care about in society? So that's the plan, and I want to begin, as I said, with the history. Now, one of the things I find really interesting is that although today economic growth sits at the center of our common lives, what is fascinating is that before the 1950s, almost no politicians, policymakers, economists, business leaders, anyone was talking about the idea of economic growth. And that's what this Google Ngram shows. There's almost no mention of the phrase economic growth in print publications before 1950. And that only really changes, and the key point here is that even if policymakers and politicians had decided they wanted to pursue economic growth, they wouldn't have been able to. Until the 1950s, there was no reliable way of measuring how large the economy was, whether it was growing, and if so, by how much. And that only changes in World War II. So a basic question when you're waging war is how much of the economy can you slice up and dedicate to the war effort, and how much needs to be kept behind for civilian needs. And when policymakers in Britain faced this question, they couldn't answer it. There was no way of knowing how large the economy was. And so in stepped this man, the great British economist, John Maynard Keynes, to develop what would become known in the 1990s, along with Simon Kuznets in the US, the measure gross domestic product, or GDP. But GDP doesn't explain where growth comes from. The creation of GDP doesn't explain where growth comes from. GDP is just a static snapshot, of course, of how large the economy is at any particular moment in time. But growth is about relentlessly pursuing increases in GDP. So how did that become such a priority? Well, the answer to that is war again, albeit war of a different type. So when the Second World War comes to an end and the Cold War begins, none of the traditional measures of who's winning the war are useful. Things like territory won and lost, soldiers killed, weapons destroyed. None of that tells you who's winning in the battle between the US and the Soviet Union. And what becomes particularly important, particularly useful for seeing or for telling who's winning in that conflict is a very different measure, an economic measure, which is which economy is growing faster, the US or the Soviet Union. You get this remarkable period of growthmanship that begins with the Cold War. So you have President Kennedy, for instance, in the 1960s talking about how growth would be the thing that helps those sitting, quote, on the razor edge of decision fall on the side of capitalism. Then you have Khrushchev saying in response that growth is the battering ram with which they would smash the capitalist system. So it's war, first hot war, then Cold War, that puts growth on the map for the first time. But what happens is that as the 20th century unfolds and the demands of war fall away, it turns out that growth is associated with almost every measure, again, of human flourishing. Societies that grow more have populations that live longer, healthier lives. It creates more jobs. It's able to fund a more generous welfare system. And so as the demands of war fall away, growth sort of stubbornly remains behind as a policy priority. So it gets to its sort of pole policy-making position almost by accident. And as I said, my starting point in thinking about growth and this growth dilemma, this tension between the promise and the price of growth, is that we desperately need more growth. If growth were to fizzle out, it would just be a catastrophe. And so a natural question then is, well, how do we get more growth? Where does growth come from? And I think, again, one of the really interesting things is that although today politicians and policymakers talk very confidently about the idea of growth, we actually know surprisingly little about those causes. It remains one of the great mysteries of economic thought. Despite all the intellectual effort that's gone into trying to understand the causes of growth, there is a huge amount of debate and disagreement and uncertainty. That said, I do think there is one really important lesson for thinking about the causes of growth that we can draw out from this fog of uncertainty. And it's this, which is that if we want more growth, that growth has to come from technological progress. And if we want technological progress, what we need to do is to discover ever more ideas about the world, ever more creative, inventive, innovative, ingenious ideas. Now, this story that growth comes from technological progress and technological progress comes from more ideas matters, it seems to me, for three big reasons. The first reason is that I think it can help us correct some popular misunderstandings about the causes of growth. So it's very common, for instance, if you spend time in the environmental movement today, to hear something along the lines of this, that infinite growth is not possible on a finite planet. It's become something of a kind of rallying cry for the environmental movement. But this is in fact wrong. Infinite growth is possible on a finite planet. And the reason why it's possible, the reason why the environmental movement often makes this mistake, is because they are relying on a very old-fashioned view of economic activity. A view that's kind of better suited to the kind of 18th or 19th century, when when economies in this part of the world were tended to be made up of farms and factories. A material world where things could, inputs into production and outputs from production could be readily counted. And it's true, in this sort of world, there are obvious limits, physical limits on human activity, on economic activity. There's only so much land that can be farmed. There's only so much raw material for production. But this view that, we live on a finite physical planet, but this view of where growth comes from distracts us from how growth actually works. Again, growth doesn't come, and this is so important, from using ever more resources, more land, more raw materials, and so on. Growth comes by discovering ever more productive ways of using the resources that we have. In other words, growth comes again from technological progress. So another way to think about this is that growth doesn't come from the tangible world of objects, the things we can see and touch and drop on our feet, but growth comes from the intangible world of ideas. So what do I mean by ideas? Well, I mean recipes or instructions for organizing the atoms in the world, or more prosaically, recipes or instructions for making more productive use of the resources that we have. And the key point here is that whereas the planet of tangible physical resources might be finite, the universe of those intangible ideas is unimaginably vast. For all intents and purposes, as good as infinite. So just one way to hammer this point home. If you take a kitchen larder, and imagine it's a well-stocked larder, so there are 300 ingredients in this larder. There are finite ingredients in this larder, but there are more possible recipes for combining these ingredients than there are atoms in the universe. And the same principle applies when we're thinking about growth in an economy, where we're dealing not just with 300 ingredients in a larder, but quite literally all of the atoms in the universe. A second reason that this story, that growth comes from technological progress and technological progress comes from more ideas, a second reason this is really important is because it gives us a better sense of the levers that we can pull to get more growth. There is often a sense among politicians and policymakers around the world that growth comes from doing big, impressive things in the material world. Building more houses, building faster trains, building wider roads. That stuff's not going to harm growth, but if you really want to get more serious economic growth in GDP per capita, the question is, how do you generate ever more creative, new, inventive ideas about the world? How do you get more technological progress? And I think the answer to that question are four very different areas of policy. Thinking about intellectual property, how we own, the rules and regulations that shape who owns and controls ideas in society. Investing in research and development. We can't expect a steady stream of new ideas about the world unless we invest in their discovery. Getting more people into the parts of the economy which are responsible for generating more ideas. And finally, and perhaps most radically, using the technologies that we're developing today to help us generate new ideas themselves. So let me just pull out a couple of these just to give you a flavor of what I'm talking about. Research and development. Here is research and development expenditure as a percentage of GDP in various countries around the world. At the top, you have Israel, which invests about 5.5% of GDP in R&D every year. The USA, about 2% behind. The OECD, on average, less than 3%. And then at the tail, you have lots of European countries, Ireland, for instance, but others as well. Britain just slightly ahead. The point I would make here is that you cannot expect a steady stream of new ideas about the world unless we collectively invest seriously in their discovery. That's one point I want to make. The other one I want to make is thinking about these technologies themselves. And this is, I think, the most provocative, but also in a way the most most sort of profound change that's happening at the moment in the world we live in. I think in the 20th century, the best ideas we had about the world came from the heads of smart human beings. And a country's prosperity depended upon its collective willingness to invest in human capital, the skills and capabilities of its workforce. I wonder if in the 21st century, the best ideas we have about the world are going to come increasingly from these technologies that we're building instead, and a country's prosperity is going to depend far more on its willingness to invest in those technologies instead. So just to give you a flavor of what it is that I'm talking about here, we sort of caught a glimpse of what technology-based idea discovery could look like during the pandemic. Moderna, famously using AI to help them generate the design for their COVID vaccine. And now the field of AI-enabled drug discovery is pretty widespread. The most interesting to me and the most, again, sort of kind of provocative example of this is what happened with AlphaFold in the last few years. So AlphaFold is a system designed by DeepMind, an artificial intelligence company owned by Google. And a few years ago, they solved the so-called protein folding problem. So just in short, the natural world is full of millions of proteins, and if we want to understand how disease works and be able to treat disease, we need to know what the 3D shape of proteins is. But figuring out the 3D shape of proteins is incredibly difficult. It would take an average PhD student in biology, it said, their entire PhD to figure out the shape of just one protein. And we knew until recently about 10 to 15% of the 3D shapes. And yet what AlphaFold did was that it stepped forward, and essentially it's a system that has solved the protein folding problem. It has calculated the 3D shape of every protein, and they've made it available open source. And it's going to transform, it already is, our understanding of disease and how we treat them. What's interesting is that last year, Demis Hassabis, the co-founder of DeepMind, the company responsible for building this system, won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. This is a system that has generated extraordinarily profound ideas about the world. And I think this is a glimpse of what we're going to see far more of in years and decades to come. These extraordinarily capable systems themselves helping us better understand the world, generate new ideas about the world. The third reason I think this story matters is that it matters particularly for Europe. And thinking about this, why is it, so I've said the US versus the UK, it should be the US versus the EU. Why is it that the gap between the EU and the US has widened from 17% in 2002 to 30% in 2023 in terms of GDP? Why is that? I think the best insight was buried away in the Draghi report with which you will all be familiar. And just quoting here, if we exclude the tech sector, EU productivity growth over the past 20 years would be broadly at par with the United States. The reason the US has grown so much faster than the EU over the last few decades is not because the US has built more trains, has a better train network. Anyone who's taken a ride on Amtrak will know that that is obviously not the case. The reason the US has soared relative to the EU is because it has this technology sector, this extraordinary cauldron of ideas, of innovation, of creativity that the EU does not have. In fact, if the EU were to have grown, were to have closed that gap with the US over the last couple of decades, on average, it's thought that real wages in the EU would be $8,500 higher if that gap had closed over the last few decades. So I think there are various reasons why being clear about this idea that growth comes from technological progress and technological progress comes from new ideas matters so much for thinking about how we get more growth. But the point I would want to make is that if we simply plow on in pursuit of more growth, we would be ignoring the tremendous price of growth as well. And so what we've got to do, it seems to me, is ask the question, how can we pursue a different type of growth? And to catch one example of what it would mean to pursue a different type of growth, I want to focus on one dimension of the price of growth, which is the most traditional one, which is that we are, in some sense, growing towards a kind of climate catastrophe, the climate impact of economic growth. And I want to take you back to 2007, when the first report of its kind into the economics of climate change was written by Sir Nicholas Stern. And one of the central conclusions of this report in 2007 was that if we wanted to reduce emissions by 80%, it would cost us 1% of GDP per year. In other words, there was a trade-off between growth and the climate. We had to pay a serious price in terms of growth in order to protect the climate. The year after 2008, Nicholas Stern came forward and said, no, I got it wrong. Climate change is worse than I thought. It's actually going to cost us 2% of GDP per year to reduce emissions by 80%. The trade-off between growth and the climate had got worse. Fast forward, though, to the year 2020, and look at the work of the UK Climate Change Committee, which is just a sort of representative example of a body at the time advising the government on how to respond to climate change. They concluded that to completely eliminate emissions, so not simply reduce them by 80%, but to completely eliminate them, would cost just 0.5% of GDP per year. In other words, the trade-off between growth and the climate had dramatically improved. Today, we need to pay a far lower price in terms of growth in order to protect the climate. And the big question is why? What has happened over the last few decades that means we are able to grow while at the same time causing far less damage to the environment, while protecting this other thing that we care about? And the answer is essentially that a couple of decades of changes in taxes and subsidies, rules and regulations, social norms, have completely transformed the incentives that people face in society. So people are incentivized not only to develop new technologies, and again, that's what drives economic growth in my argument, but also to develop a particular type of technology, namely those that allow us to grow while also causing less damage to the environment. In short, we've had not simply a technological revolution, but a green technological revolution. And I think the best example of this is what's happened with solar energy over the last few decades. So if you go back to the 1970s, solar energy really is a tool of last resort if you want to generate electricity in outer space or in an isolated lighthouse. But what we've seen over the last few decades is a precipitous, an exponential fall in the cost of generating electricity via solar from about, I think it's $100 per watt back in the 1970s to about half a dollar per watt today. And we've seen as well an explosive uptake in the use of solar panels as well. We see them all over the place. What has driven this is technological progress, a particular type of technological progress. And what it's meant in practice is that more and more countries around the world are able to grow the top line in each of those boxes while reducing emissions in absolute terms at the same time, the bottom line there, in a way that was just simply inconceivable a few decades ago. So the point I would make is that we should not underestimate the power of incentives to shape the type or the direction of technological progress that takes place in society. And the argument that I make is that we ought to be trying to do this not simply with respect to the climate, but we ought to be trying to change those incentives to promote technological progress that not only makes us more prosperous, but also doesn't widen inequalities in society, that doesn't undermine the availability of good work, that doesn't challenge how well our politics functions, and doesn't disrupt the health of local places and communities. And what I try and do in my work is show how we might do each of those things in turn. I think one kind of quite powerful way of thinking about this is the following, which is when many people talk about growth, often the metaphor they have in mind is that we are, as societies, almost sitting in a kind of train cabin. And the choice that we have is whether to kind of push forward on the lever and go faster and get more technological progress and more growth, or pull back and go slower and get less technological progress and less growth. But the basic idea is that our kind of direction of travel is fixed. That we've just, the only choice is between more and less growth. And we've just got to trundle along in the direction that's been set for us. And I think this is the wrong metaphor. I think a far better metaphor for us is a sort of nautical one. We're out there in a boat bobbing away at sea, and we can pull up our sails and go faster, or we can pull them down and go slower. But we also have a huge amount of discretion collectively over our direction of travel, over the sorts of technologies, the type of technologies that we develop in society, and the nature of economic growth that we enjoy as a result. So that's what I think we ought to be trying to do, to try and pursue growth while also at the same time pursuing growth by not challenging these other things that we might value and care about. But I think the really difficult, the big challenge that we face in the short run is that might not always be possible, that it might not be possible to weaken the trade-off between growth and these other things that we care about. And so the final question that we face, and it's perhaps the most difficult one of all, is what do we choose to do? Do we want to pursue growth, or do we want to protect these other ends that we care about? And you see this tension time and again. And I think there is a view today that the way to respond to this tension between growth and these other things that we care about is to play around with the GDP measure. To say that, look, there are things out there that we think are valuable and important, the state of the environment, the level of inequality in society, and what we ought to do is we ought to come up with measures of those things and bundle them into GDP and kind of make a more perfect GDP measure, a sort of GDP plus. And I think that is a big mistake. And the reason I think it's a mistake is because these questions about what else we ought to value if not growth, and how much we ought to value them, these are not technical questions about mismeasurement, but they are moral questions about what matters. They are some of the hardest, most difficult questions that we can ask, and there's a huge amount of moral disagreement about them. And what that means is that the place for resolving these questions, in my view, about what we ought to care about if not growth and how much we ought to care about them, it's not for economists like me to answer those questions. It's not for social scientists, but it's for citizens. The place for answering them is not economics, but it's politics. And so one of the things that I think is really important at the moment is that we encourage the development of new political institutions that are capable of hosting debate and disagreement among citizens about these trade-offs between growth and these other things that we care about. And I take a lot of encouragement from the rise of so-called mini-publics across Europe and elsewhere over the last few years. I think we need to see far more of this when we're thinking about growth and the tension between growth and other things that we care about. Again, these are questions not for economists and social scientists, but in my view, they are questions for citizens to be answering. So let me just close. I closed last night on a note of optimism, and I want to close on another note of optimism because, and it's a related one, but we live in an age of anxiety where almost every day we are reminded of the sort of existential challenges that we face and our supposed incapacity for dealing with them. But the argument that I hope I've made this morning is a far more optimistic one. That we, in a sense, also have an existential opportunity in front of us as well. We are looking out into the future far more collectively prosperous and technologically capable than any point in human history. We have this interesting moment, a kind of moral moment, an opportunity to pay far more attention to these other ends that, in my view, we've tended to neglect until now. And we can, as I said, do so from this position of economic and technological strength. There is a line that I love from the great late philosopher Derek Parfit when he said, "We have the power not just to make life good in decades to come, but to make it better in ways that we now cannot even imagine." Nothing in my view could be more important than that, and that, I think, engaging with that is the great challenge for all of us at the moment. So I will finish there. Thank you very much, everyone, and I look forward now to taking some questions and hearing some reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Again, another provocative introduction to our discussions for today. Daniel also addressed us last night, for those of you who were not with us yesterday evening. I'm sorry you weren't. And it left several questions. And I know that already I have spoken to colleagues this morning who are saying, well, I'd like to take him up on that.
Yeah.
So, and I know Daniel is ready to be taken up on many of the issues here that he has raised today. I also just want to draw attention to the fact that you're all very welcome, and it's just wonderful to see so many of you here this morning. I would also just like to remind you that we are also being followed on web stream. So hello to our audience who are out there, colleagues out in Eurofound, not least, but also across Europe. So you're also very welcome. So Daniel, there are greater minds in this room than mine, certainly, when it comes to all things economics, and I am sure they have questions that will ask you about GDP in great detail. I am interested in the values.
Yes.
I am interested in the moral questions that you raise. And when you talk about that there can be infinite growth in a finite planet, I disagree with you, but I'm not going to do that ad nauseum. But I do wonder, does there not come a point where the trade-off is one trade-off too far? And that decision has to be based on values. Yeah. And seeing as today's discussion is very much about the European social model, and the European social model differentiates us from the other trading blocs. So if we're going to be more competitive against those that don't have a European social model, it's about values. And so my question to you really would be, is it not too easy to say, well, that's for the citizens to decide in assemblies and all of the rest? Is it not more about saying, is the European social model not, in fact, Europe's moral compass?
Yeah. So various responses. I mean, one is, one of the things I'm trying to argue is that often the trade-offs, often the trade-offs are illusory. That there are ways for us to pursue growth while also protecting lots of other things that we think are valuable and important. And I think, for instance, and I do think the environmental story, although the way in which people talk about the environment today is that it's an utter catastrophe, but I think there's another telling of the story over the last few decades, which is that actually it's an extraordinary accomplishment that we have been able to develop these technologies that now allow our economies to grow while also causing just far less damage to the environment relative to what was thought a few decades ago. And I think that basic insight that there are ways for us to pursue different types of growth, we don't always have to choose between them, is really important. But I completely agree that, particularly in the short run, there are often tensions between the pursuit of growth and the protection of these other things that are valuable and important. And I agree with you with the observation that these questions are not technical ones, but they are moral ones. They are not questions about what is, but they are questions about what ought to be. And my view is that these moral questions, the place for engaging with them is politics. And it's not politics, in my view, traditionally understood, great chambers of state and traditional politicians, but it's individual citizens coming together to debate and discuss these issues. One of the big worries I have about at the moment is that these trade-offs between growth and other things that people might care about are being made without the input of citizens, and as a result, they are lacking legitimacy. I worry, for instance, there are lots of people who feel that the pursuit of net zero or environmental objectives, given the economic costs that are involved, that there are people who feel disenfranchised and disengaged from that not technical decision, but moral one about whether we are going to prioritize in the short run the pursuit of prosperity or the protection of the environment. I have my own views on whether or not we're resolving that trade-off adequately, but I also know that many people out there do. And one of my worries, big worries, is that unless we engage people in how we resolve these trade-offs, the way in which we resolve them as a society is going to, and is already lacking, in some cases, legitimacy. And that's a big concern for me. So I'm with you all the way up until the thought that simply recognizing that these are moral issues is sufficient. That once you recognize that these are moral issues about what really matters, we have to make sure that we are debating and disagreeing and discussing them as a society, as citizens. So that that we can reach a kind of balanced dissatisfaction in society where everyone feels that even if the path we're taking doesn't necessarily reflect their own personal views, they feel like they have taken part in a debate, a discussion to shape that direction.
But I suppose many of those issues as well, which are moral issues and that you say should be dealt with in the political arena, they're not separate from the economic arena because, as Ivailo mentioned earlier, I mean, much work has been done, not only by Eurofound, but by many others, on the economic cost that there is about not integrating these moral issues into our societies and indeed perhaps our GDP. And the talk about going beyond GDP, I recognize that you don't, but perhaps that is also something that we could look at, and we certainly will look at in the sessions later. But I'm not going to, because we have gone a little bit over time, so I'm not going to dwell too much here. I know we have questions in the audience, and I'd like to go to the floor straight away. Bear with me. We will have the minister arriving. Now. So I'm going to go to the floor, and please, Pilvi. If you could just introduce yourself.
Yes, please. It'd be really helpful for me to know.
Yeah, there should be microphones in the room here. Can we give a microphone to the lady here with the yellow jacket?
Thanks a lot. Pilvi Torsti, Director of a new agency, European Training Foundation, working on the human capital development, mainly outside Europe. In my past, I've also worked as a researcher and in education, field of education, as a decision maker in my native Finland. My question is a combination from your yesterday's and today's talk and the role of education, which of course we all also ask now with the AI, that what is actually the role of the education systems? And you showed, of course, the convincing data about the a one-to-one tuition and what that really means for the learning outcomes. But of course, education is actually a building block of a democratic society. And for instance, for the citizens that are able to take part in the votes that were just presented here as a kind of solution. So I would probably challenge a little bit yesterday's talk about the role of education as simply path for knowledge, but rather actually a building block of a society, and also more and more actually having demand to develop sort of socio-emotional skills that are not exactly measured in one-on-one tutoring, whether human or AI, and would be interested in your comments on that. Thank you.
Daniel, I'm going to just take one or two more just so that we're efficient on this. Can I see, is anyone else in the room looking for a question now? This lady here, yeah, beside Pilvi here. If you could also introduce yourself also, thank you.
Hello, I'm also from the same institution, European Training Foundation, labor market expert. I was just reflecting, and I would like to really hear your feeling about well, you left the biggest responsibility to the citizens in this puzzle, in my opinion, and to the politicians. But you left the biggest responsibility to deal with all these values and everything. Yes. Of course, it's for citizens and politicians, obviously. What else could it be? But are citizens ready to take up this responsibility, or the current political systems, how they go, erosion of the democracy, whatever it is limited, however limited it is, by the way. I mean, we are talking about a handful of countries anyway. Thinking about also the impact of algorithms on polarization, social polarization and everything, I am not sure that the politicians and citizens are up to the challenge. And this is, easy to say, but almost impossible to do, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Within this puzzle, one more thing, how do developing countries fit into this puzzle, moreover?
Okay. And one more there, Jerzy, our chairman of the management board.
Thank you. As usual, very interesting. I just have two questions which kind of follow this discussion about not economic only aspects, but also moral aspects. So my first question would be, because you have said something very intriguing, that growth ultimately depends on new ideas. And that then you said also that the amazingly good ideas could be developed by those new technologies, AI, for instance. So my question to you is, what if AI tells us that the best way to development is the Chinese way, that in other words, living in a concentration camp where everybody will be well fed and well clad, So what do we do with this? How do we, kind of, if the question of growth would be, this is the criterion, then how do you moderate it with other values? And then what would be the effect on competitiveness? Because ultimately, we have to win the competition. The second question is, how the mini publics that we need to be. I reject this idea that the public is not mature enough and therefore they need to be told, what to do, because that's ultimately anti-democratic in my view. But how do you engage the Chinese and the Indians in that discussion? Because ultimately the discussion about the model of growth will be decided there, not in the shrinking in terms of population Western countries. Thank you.
Great. Let me start with the first question about the role of education. I agree with you that traditionally, since the sort of 1950s, 60s, essentially in the second half of the 20th century, the conception of the role of education changes, and it does become more of a kind of instrumentalist, a means to an end, a means to get the right skills and capabilities to flourish in the workplace. And lots of kind of philosophy of education narrows down quite a lot. It's not like that at the start of the 20th century, and it's certainly not like that at other moments in human history. I think one of the challenges from some of those ideas I shared yesterday about what is the role of education in a world where, in that sort of scenario where there might not be enough work for everybody to do. That forces you to engage with these questions about what the role of education is. And it's very obvious that one of the answers to that is that, well, education isn't simply a means to an end, but it's also, and it has an important kind of civic and democratic role. So I agree with you on that. I think that role is important now, and I think it becomes increasingly important if you take seriously some of these ideas about where these technologies might be taking us. On the question about whether or not citizens are up for it, and you said something along the lines of, what else might we do? The truth is that at the moment we don't really engage citizens. And the sort of the challenge I would make is that the conventional wisdom that the way to resolve some of these trade-offs and moral trade-offs, not technical ones, is through getting our measurement right. These efforts to kind of improve the GDP measure. Those seem to me to be good examples of our current strategy, which is smuggling away these difficult moral questions about what do we really value and how much ought we to value them. Should the environment be in that GDP measure, the GDP plus measure? Many people have a strong view on that, but that's not a technical view, that's a moral view. What weight do you put on that environmental variable in this GDP plus function? That question about what that weight ought to be with respect to the environment relative to, say, inequality in society, that is a moral question, not a technical one. And at the moment, there are very few places in the world where these conversations about what we ought to value, and if not, how much ought we to value them, where those are engaged with by citizens rather than by people like me, technocrats, economists, statisticians. So there is a response that we have at the moment, and I think it's the wrong direction of travel. And I know I'm sort of swimming against a current. I know that all around the world the view is that this is a mistake, but I think we're making a mistake. On this question about two questions. One about how should we handle the outputs of these AI systems. One of the arguments of my work at the moment is that it's not simply enough to, what we have to do in thinking about how we prepare the next generation to use these technologies is it's not simply enough to teach people how to use them, but we have to teach them how to use them critically. These systems are not like calculators. They make mistakes. They have limitations. They have weaknesses. They hallucinate. There are lots of, and a big challenge for us in drawing up this new curriculum for our society and thinking about how we engage with this technology and use it effectively is to teach citizens how to use it critically, to not use it blindly, to not take things as, both for technical reasons, because answers just might be wrong. It might just get a bit of reasoning or a bit of mathematics wrong, but also exactly as you say, for moral reasons. It might be taking normative positions on issues, these systems that we as individuals, as a society, feel uncomfortable with. So I think one of our big challenges is teaching people how to use them critically, not simply use them blindly. Whereas at the moment, I think too many people are being taught to use these things blindly. On this question about China and India, I mean, this is a far bigger question about how we, about how the world order works in this setting where we have, countries with very different kind of institutional and political setups, and I think it's, it is far bigger than simply this issue. It's a kind of political question about how you shape, influence, direct the kind of institutions in these countries, or, as you say, kind of win the battle, the race, the competition with those institutions. but it would be a non-starter for me to go to China and say the way to respond to climate change here is to engage in kind of citizens' assemblies, and it's just completely antithetical to their sort of political and philosophical culture. So I am, in making these calls, very much, as you're sort of picking up on, operating in a thinking about the kind of the democratic institutions that we have in our part of the world.
Actually, I'm just going to go for one more short question, very short question. Salvatore.
Thank you. From Italy, the workers group of the Eurofound. I particularly appreciated your note of optimism. It's very much needed these days. At the same time, you invited us to look for more citizens' participation. Trade unions around the world represent directly the voice of workers. So there's no better way of participating in engaging in a trade union these days to have your voice heard. At the same time, when you say we have to involve our people and make their voice heard, I find it extremely difficult these days for this to happen. So I'm very thankful for your optimism, but I'm also pessimistic about this because I see that even in Europe,
yes,
in Western countries, there is really a big hurdle we're facing at the moment in having people participating because there is a shrinking civic space and civil liberties are severely under attack even in Western countries. So you invite us to make people and citizens and workers, I say, using my language, participate, but I see that our space is really shrinking in a time when the far right, extremist movements are on the rise. So what do you see? I mean, are you as pessimistic as I am, or do you see a way out of this problem?
Yeah, I mean, I find the trends you describe alarming, and they run, and it's what, trying to reverse those trends is, part of the sort of the project that I think is important at the moment. I mean, one observation I would make is that, I spoke last night about how when thinking about education, it's not simply enough to ask the question, what are we teaching people, but we also need to ask, how are we teaching? That the way in which we educate needs to change. One of the things I find quite striking about, organized labor around the world is how little those organizations themselves have changed how they work. This is a challenge that I would put to many unions and many organizations, that they are the way in which they operate, the way in which they organize, the way in which they make their voice heard. It's all it too is very old-fashioned, and I sometimes I do wonder if one of the reasons that union membership is on the decline among young people, for instance, is that these institutions don't reflect the way that, although they are perhaps working for ends that are aligned with their own, the institutions themselves don't look like. It doesn't feel like they are the sort of institution that represents them in terms of how they operate, the technologies they use, the way in which they move in the world. I think it's a really interesting challenge for unions, for organized movements around the world, to ask, how can we use these technologies as well to transform how we work, and could we use these technologies to encourage wider membership? So I think there's how can this question, how can unions be sort of 21st century rather than 20th century unions? I think is quite an interesting sort of exam question. But I agree with your observation, which is that this trend is not a good one, and it's one that I'm wanting to push against and try and reverse in calling for greater political, deliberative participation in these questions.
Okay, well, we have the arrival of the Taoiseach in the building, so I am going to ask those of you who still have questions in mind to keep them with you for the breakout sessions, which will follow shortly. We have the 3 breakout sessions, which will allow us to delve into some of the issues which you've heard about today, quality of jobs, AI, and also, of course, social investment. So There's no risk that you will not be able to discuss the issues that you've heard today. Daniel will be around for a little while, so you'll be able to dip in and out if you wish to speak with him. And I would ask you all to put your hands together again to thank Daniel very much for his presentation and contribution. Okay.
Thank you very much.
A Taoiseach fáilte rót, dúirt míle magat, ghlach lenar gira. Tá mí tána bhí agus honorach tú ave inar mac inuf. Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for being with us today, and I would like also to greet again Minister, the Vice President of the Commission, the Chair of the Employment Committee in the European Parliament, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much again for being here. We have a big pleasure and honor to have among us the Prime Minister, the Taoiseach of Ireland, Mr. Micheál Martin, who is going to address us. Before giving him the floor, I would like to express our gratitude as an agency, EU agency working in Ireland, for the excellent conditions, for a very good cooperation with the Irish government, including this very event traditionally we do together with the Irish government, and this is how we can use this beautiful site also. So thank you very much, Taoiseach, for the support that we receive in order to perform our work here. You have the floor.
Agus gwynwysle ta os an donarmsa fe in shulov inov eg an forum fonduracht Eurofound fe coig agus gurmile maha gov galer sochten fáte Chris of Rome. Mar ta sign roll eg Eurofund Arabi an gníomhaireacht Europach ag a bhfuil mandáid le down chinilecha marachtala agus ibre a ausú de Hiránig nach Europa. I déh idirflé bunathe ólas I dro polisathe sóisialta, fostíochta agus polisathe a bhaineann le hobar a chur chun cín agus é scú. Agus credim go daingin nach raibh an signróil sin cho tácht a chríomh agus atá sé níis, agus éiríonn leis an róil sin bonús na bar haula déan lathí atá a grílár or go hionscail orpach chur anúil. So, that was in Gaelic for those who may not be as well versed. And delighted to be with my colleague, Minister for Social Protection, Derek Cleary. And I'm going to thank the commitment and the professionalism that Eurofound brings to its work, convey my sincere appreciation to Executive Director Ivalo Calfin, and to all the staff in Loughlinston Town House, and your proficiency in Irish as well is heartening. This is a flagship event of the European Foundation for the improvement of living and working conditions, the Foundation Forum. And in that context, I want to extend a special welcome or Céad Míle Fáilte this morning to Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Roxana Minzatu, who has responsibility for social rights and skills, quality jobs and preparedness, and also to Lee Anderson, Chair of the European Parliament Employment and Social Affairs Committee. You are particularly welcome here this morning. And it's an honour for me to have this opportunity to celebrate the agency's 50th anniversary, a milestone that is deeply intertwined with the history of Ireland's membership of the European Union. The establishment of Eurofound was a significant institutional development in Ireland's first presidency of the Council. It is also important at this stage to acknowledge the significant contribution of Dr. Patrick Hillery, who served as our Minister for Foreign Affairs when Ireland signed the treaty to join the then European communities in 1972. And Dr. Hillery served as Social Affairs Commissioner upon her accession in 1973, progressing the Social Action Plan that led directly to the establishment of Eurofound in 1975. He was elected President of Ireland the following year, and he performed the official opening of the Eurofound offices in Loughlinstown in October of 1978. He was probably one of the more significant figures in Irish political history, often understated because he was a quietly spoken man, but his work in education in particular laid the foundations for really significant investment in education and also the development of what became known as the regional technical colleges, now technological universities. And he developed a model of third level education that was particularly related to the work environment and the skills environment. He was way ahead of his time. When he opened the Eurofound offices in 1978, he made the following point, and I quote, "Nobody would deny that economic progress is important for the people of Europe, but the cost of that progress to their health and to the environment where they live should not be permitted to be excessive," unquote. And that captures well, I suppose, how the goal of improving living and working conditions was largely seen at that time. It has evolved in the intervening period. To many people at that time, the trajectory of economic progress seemed clear, dominated as it was by the industrial technologies of the time. But policymakers recognised the need to be attentive to managing negative externalities, which were seen mostly in terms of mitigating risks to human health and to the natural environment. Economic development on its own was not enough, and there needed to be a focus on improving conditions for workers across society and the economy. In this regard, a long-term perspective and a holistic approach was and remains essential. Realising our goals of long-term productivity growth, enhanced human well-being, and protecting the biosphere will all rest on the same foundation of that is the skills and capabilities of our people. And it is only by unlocking the full potential of the human resources at our disposal, the talents and creative potential of each and every European citizen, that we will successfully navigate the period ahead. And that is why I welcome the theme that you have chosen for the Foundation Forum of 2025, Europe's social model as the key to competitive growth. Eurofound plays a distinctive role in promoting and facilitating knowledge-based dialogue towards stronger social employment and work-related policies. Its unique tripartite governance structure, bringing together government, employer and trade union perspectives, is particularly well suited to shaping consensus on necessary labour market and human capital building reforms. This includes providing the empirical foundation for establishing common ground across differing national perspectives and institutional traditions. The evidence that Eurofound has gathered through its research is reflected in no small way in the European Pillar of Social Rights. The European Working Conditions Surveys, launched in 1990, and the European Quality of Life Surveys, launched in 2003, have both proved indispensable in terms of the comparative and longitudinal data they provide on working and living conditions. Important political initiatives that have been strongly influenced by this research include the Gender Equality Strategy, the Work-Life Balance Directive, and the Youth Guarantee. Eurofound research also plays a crucial role in strengthening European competitiveness. You provide the rigorous evidence and empirical insight needed to understand how work, skills, and enterprise performance are evolving in the face of mega trends like digitalisation, the green transition, demographic change, and shifting patterns of globalisation. For example, the recent study on SME digitalisation provides valuable evidence on how digital adoption shapes both productivity and job quality. By tracking developments in working life, measuring skills shortages, and analysing workforce ageing and new forms of work, Eurofound research helps us understand the underlying dynamics of productivity and competitiveness that are reshaping our economies. In linking these insights to practical policy lessons and applications, Eurofound supports the design of forward-looking measures to ensure that Europe remains an attractive place to live, to work, and to invest in. These will be important issues for Ireland as we assume the rotating presidency of the Council for the 8th time in the second half of 2026. As a country, we are rightly proud of our contribution to significant European Union milestones during our previous presidencies. These include hosting the first ever European Council meeting in Dublin in 1975, supporting a common approach to German reunification in 1990, and of course, the historic Day of Welcomes in May of 2004, when the European Union gained 10 new member states in its biggest ever enlargement. An enlargement will be on our agenda in the second half of next year also. We look forward to the immense privilege of working on behalf of the 450 million people that call the European Union their home, advancing the common European interest and improving the lives of citizens right across the Union. The government has begun consultations with our social partners, stakeholders, and with other European Union member states to help prepare Ireland's presidency policy priorities. A public consultation is also open for submissions. We very much welcome your inputs as we advance work to develop our policy programme and priorities. Eurofound's role in supporting the rotating presidency of the Council extends far beyond simple research provision. The agency's half-century of institutional memory and its established relationships with social partners and policymakers across all member states make it an indispensable facilitator of dialogue. Particularly strong examples under the current Danish presidency include the research informing September's high-level conference on affordable and sustainable housing, and the high-level conference earlier this month on disability independent living in tomorrow's Europe. We look forward to the Quality Jobs Roadmap that will be presented by Executive Vice President Mizatu and her colleagues in the European Commission before the end of the year, informed by extensive public consultation and social partner engagement that has already taken place. The Quality Jobs Roadmap will set an ambitious employment agenda for the European Union to remain competitive, innovative and fair, and to create a level playing field that prioritises high standards for quality jobs. And these are issues that Ireland will look to advance during our presidency next year. Here in Ireland, the government understands the values of social dialogue as a way of maximising common understanding and engagement between all sectors of society. We have long recognised the importance of such engagement as we tackle the many economic, social and environmental challenges facing the country. The Labour Employer Economic Forum, or LEAF as we call it, which I chair as Taoiseach, represents one such mechanism for tripartite social dialogue, through which there has been meaningful, systematic and timely involvement of social partners in the design and implementation of employment and social policies. The value of this engagement was recently demonstrated with the launch of Ireland's Action Plan to promote collective bargaining. And this plan aligns with our obligations under the European Union Directive on adequate minimum wages and reflects our belief that collective bargaining, when pursued voluntarily and in good faith, is a strategic tool for building both resilient enterprises and a more equitable society. Taking inspiration for Eurofound's lead, our own Department of Enterprise, Tourism and Employment is funding an extensive cross-border labour market survey, the Working in Ireland survey. And this work is well underway, and we expect results and research outputs soon, which will deepen our understanding of unfolding work patterns and attitudes to work in Ireland at this time. Let me also take the opportunity to acknowledge the important role of the European Economic and Social Committee as the voice of organised civil society in Europe. And we were delighted, and I was delighted to see an Offaly man, Seamus Boland, take on the presidency of this important institution earlier this year. He has been an outstanding advocate on the civic society side in Ireland for many, many years, and indeed across Europe. And we look forward to hosting the annual meeting of the Presidents and Secretary-Generals of the European Economic and Social Committee and of the National Economic and Social Councils during our presidency. The world we live in as Europeans is changing, and we must continue to change with it. This is a challenging time in global affairs, with continuing conflicts across the world, trade disruptions and pressures on the multilateral rules-based system. The European Union remains the leading global exemplar of sophisticated multilateralism and collective decision-making at its finest. As an unsurpassed example of successful cooperation and integration, the European Union has nothing to fear from deep and active engagement with global partners, not just those with whom we are generally of like mind, but also those with whom discussions can be more challenging. Our treaties make clear that we are engaged in the world not only to promote our own values and interests, but also to make a contribution to peace, security, and sustainable development, to promote free and fair trade, to work for the eradication of poverty and the protection of human rights, and to ensure the observance and development of international law, including respect for the UN Charter. Taking such a positive, broad and ambitious approach is, in my view, the only way to ensure that Europe can unlock the full potential of our positive influence on issues of global concern, such as climate change. As I made clear recently, when I delivered Ireland's national statement at COP30 in Belém, Brazil, climate change is no longer a distant threat. It is a daily reality, and we are all feeling its consequences. I also express my serious concern that the spirit of common purpose is weakening. There are other threats and crises that can seem more pressing, including geopolitical turbulence, economic pressures, conflict, war and dislocations, but global temperatures are still rising and the clock is ticking, and we must act now. Before I conclude, it's worth recalling the context in which Eurofound was established 50 years ago. Ireland's average incomes at the time were roughly 2/3 of the then European average. The so-called marriage bar, requiring women to give up their employment, was only newly abolished in Ireland. Joining the European communities was a catalyst for transformative economic and social changes in the decades since. Your conference today looks to the future against the backdrop of fast evolving digital developments. Your deliberations will examine important questions around future-proofing work, the impact of AI on the labour market, the future of social investment, and the role of the social partners in reclaiming and renewing the European social model. On AI, I had a young 16-year-old who called into my office yesterday. She spent a day in the Taoiseach's building and in Parliament, and she came to Ireland 4 years ago from India. Her parents came to work, and she had two issues to talk to me about: AI and the issue of tension around the migration question and safety and security. On AI, she was fascinating. She's a writer. At 16 years of age, wrote me a beautiful poem about the experience of the migrant in a new land. But what was interesting is she was very worried about AI displacing the creativity of the human being. And she's observing what's happening in her class and in her school in terms of the use of AI, in many ways suppressing the thought process in terms of how you get to the introduction of an essay to the conclusion of an essay. If you use ChatGPT, whatever, you're missing out on all those kind of formative sort of processes. It's a 16-year-old was making that point to me yesterday in an interview with me. The interview became the other way around. I think I was just listening to her presentation. I mention it because I think we'll hear of her again. But I do think it's interesting that we all talk about AI in terms of the economic, the energy, et cetera, macro trends. And here's a 16-year-old observing what's happening in the classroom and looking at, say, fairly disruptive impacts on basic learning and behavioral change that will impact people's capacities, self-reliance, and thought processes. It was heartening in many respects. She had similar views to my own and being in having that fundamental belief in the human brain and the originality and creativity of the human brain should always be supreme and should always take primacy. And that was her message to me yesterday. I've digressed somewhat, but I think it's important to introduce the voice of a young 16-year-old migrant in Ireland. The other side of the story was that sense of the migrant feeling the need to suppress their own culture a bit, feeling that they're being observed differently by others. She really cut through in her writing and so forth. And that's a very significant issue for us and for the European Union, because our workforce is now a workforce made up of many different nationalities in every one of our member states. And so that then speaks to policy, culture, and how we talk about migration as governments and how we talk about migration more generally, and trying to get in underneath and understand the psychology and the impacts of language and of commentary on the migrant worker experience also. Which of course I use worker, but it's societal. These are members of our community and our society. And the path to future prosperity and success is about human capital. Human capital is now the ingredient that determines economic growth and societal growth into the future. Ireland is home to many companies, etc., etc. We grow many companies. Everyone I meet in industry and economy talk about one thing: human capital as the key to driving things forward. And therefore, we have to look after people. And we have to look after people in the workplace, and we have to look after people in society more generally as new trends and new challenges arise. And I think that's the essence of the democratic ideal at the heart of the European Union. And this democratic ideal, which is building together our bridge to a better future, is one that Eurofound is uniquely positioned to support. Please accept my very best wishes for the rest of your proceedings here today. I have every confidence in the quality of the contribution that you will continue to make. I salute your work and wish you the very best. Thank you very much indeed, and Gureen Mahagul Galer.
Back to work. I'm very pleased to inform you also that we are now joined by the Minister of State for Employment, Alan Dillon, who is with us. Minister Kaleri is among us also, and I have the very big pleasure to invite to the podium the Executive Vice President of the European Commission. And this pleasure comes from the fact that I see her leadership and passion in all the areas that we are working, promoting good working, good living conditions, and I'm very pleased to find out that many of the priorities of the Commission, some of them are not easy probably. I mean, you have all these political winding roads that have to be followed, but the priorities are very much falling into the area of competence of Eurofound. So we are already, and we are looking also for the future to provide the necessary analysis for a number of key initiatives. I mean, for the quality jobs roadmap and the act afterwards, of course, but also to the anti-poverty strategy, the housing plan, the new action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights. All these are issues that are on the list of Eurofound with years of research. That's why I really have the pleasure to invite Executive Vice President Mințatu to the podium and give her the opportunity to give us this passion and leadership that she has on these issues. Vice President, please.
Good morning. Well, I usually am a passionate speaker, but when I don't read, if I read, the passion is not as present. But in my actual work, and people do know me, and in Vailo, indeed, I try to compensate for the complex times that we live, for our social policies, with the passion and with the connections that we can use. So that being said, Ivailo, thank you for a wonderful event, wonderful venue. Thank you, to your team. Such an inspiration just to be here with you, and we have sunshine as well. Dear ministers, I'm very happy to be joined by you as well. Dear Lee Anderson, one of our great partners in the European Parliament, the chair of the Employment Committee. Professor Susskind, but I don't know if he is around. Is he? around. It's my big frustration, and I will go home with it, that I was unable to attend his speech last evening and now as well, because I had some bilaterals, but we are working to extract a lot of value from his work, and I'm very happy that he was part of this agenda. Dear representatives of governments, dear social partners, representatives of civil society, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues, it is really a pleasure to be here to celebrate with you in Dublin, in Ireland, the anniversary of the Eurofund, and to be part of the 8th Foundation Forum. These two moments come together in a time that Europe really needs your work, your passion, your research, your data. And of course, I heard a bit the speeches yesterday and today, the discussions about a human-centric policy, about a human-centric approach to AI, the discussion about balancing competitiveness and social progress. They are here among minds and ears and approaches that favor this kind of discussion and combination. Not as easy to discuss about them in other contexts and to translate them into concrete policies, but challenging and interesting and offering us a lot of space to deliver for Europe, because I really believe that we need to modernize, we need to progress, and we need to do that keeping in consideration or having in consideration the fact that people are at the center of our quest for competitiveness, that it is for the people that we are trying to be more profitable, stronger leaders in different sectors. It is for the people that we want to innovate, and we've always done so by respecting social rights and by integrating everybody in the process, and that's the mindset that we want to keep in our work in Europe. Now, going back to the anniversary of Eurofund, half a century, that's quite a milestone, and we should pause and reflect on it, because over these 5 decades, Europe has changed a lot. My speech says that Europe's changed beyond recognition. I would never say that. We can always recognize Europe. There's something about us beyond our culture. It's our social model. It's how we are, not just who we are, that I think has not changed. But it has changed. And talking about the European Union from a small economic community of 9 to a single market, a single currency, and a union of now 27, and let's see what enlargement brings about. As more than numbers, but yes, numbers matter as well in terms of transformation. Through all of this change, Eurofund has been a constant presence, helping us understand Europe's evolving world of work and giving policymakers the evidence that we need to improve people's lives. Eurofund's research has always been essential to the European projects. Its work, its activity on working conditions, on industrial relations, on employment, on the quality of life, have been able to shape countless lives. The involvement of social partners in your work and in the governance of Eurofund is one of the greatest strengths of your institution. It helps us translate our priorities into action grounded in facts. So I really want to thank you, Ivailo, and all current staff, past staff, all the teams that are here now that have been working before in the Eurofund team for an excellent cooperation, for your support. And I do hope, like your logo says there, that we can build on your past work and on your activity to shape even better future policies and the future of European project. Now, the theme of today's session could not be, of course, more timely. We are living in challenging, again, my speech says turbulent times. I think it's challenging times. Out of crisis, Europe emerged stronger. Of course, it's unprecedented that we face multiple challenges at the same time. But out of challenge raises, Europe can grow stronger. We see that our competitiveness and our security are being challenged by geopolitical tensions, by economic divides, and we sometimes hear that competitiveness and social well-being are, two different directions. It's either or, and I really disagree with this approach because, as you've mentioned here, but again, this is one room, Europe is a bigger place, the world is a bigger place. A competitive Europe, a social Europe are actually two sides of the same coin. What I would add to this message is that we need to continue to work so that this is true not just in Europe. Our biggest trap is that we discuss, of course, just about our social model and how in Europe we want to highlight that the main ingredient of competitiveness is social progress. But we cannot be separated from the rest of the world. Everything that we do, we need to translate into our presence in the international arena, in the global arena, because it is about how Europe can be competitiveness in a world that has the same rules. Or you cannot do it if it's just Europe that supports a social model. So we need to really champion this beyond our borders. And this is a message that I've given in all international contexts until now as well. But yes, we are focused on what we do better here at home. We had the Draghi report. We launched the competitiveness compass. There are elements that show where we are and how we need to move forward and with what speed and in what direction. But we do face real challenges. And we're looking at our labor markets on the one side. They look strong. They have good employment rates, the lowest unemployment rates as well. But we still need to look at structural, deeper programs that affect our growth and that ultimately do make us less competitive than other players on the global arena. We look at our stagnating labor productivity compared to non-EU economies. We look at the fact that 1 out of 5 workers is in low-wage jobs in sectors with limited productivity growth, and 1 in 12 workers is at risk of poverty. We see sizable labor and skills shortages. They are expected to increase, actually. We see underperformance in basic skills, and that affects as well the performance of our labor force and the ability to adapt to an AI, digital-driven world of labor. We want to remain competitive, we want to sustain our social model, but we need to be ambitious on both fronts. So that's why first, we're looking at quality jobs, starting from decent minimum wages. And we had a good day, I think, on November 11, with the ruling of European Court for Justice on the minimum wage directive, which stands and which is an important tool to make sure that we had adequate minimum wages in Europe. They can raise productivity by driving companies to innovate, and statutory minimum wages increases largely offset the loss of purchasing power. Second, beyond quality jobs, discussion about human capital overall is important. We need to address skills shortages with a focus on occupations in strategic sectors for the European Union economy. We will strengthen the vocational education and training and tertiary education in STEM. We need to look at how to increase advanced AI literacy and critical thinking to promote the supply of STEM teachers and to incentivize work-based learning. We need to reduce barriers to entry of professions and ensure faster recognition of qualifications in strategic sectors for the European Union and third country nationals. On the other side, looking at EU's policy priorities and Eurofund's contributions, skills and quality jobs are 2 overarching priorities that will guide our work in the rest of this mandate. With the Union of Skills strategy that we launched in March and the Quality Jobs Roadmap that we will adopt in the next weeks. On both fronts, of course, we count on Eurofund contribution. The Eurofund surveys on European companies and working conditions give excellent snapshots of employer skills requirements, of employees' views, and the restructuring trends that we see. And Eurofund work has also provided the basis that we need to measure what a quality job truly means in today's economy. Looking ahead, one of the most exciting developments is the creation of Eurofund's data lakehouse, about which we speak a lot in the Commission with the colleagues in the services, this new interagency data sharing platform. This is more than an IT project. I see it as a new way of working across agencies. It will break silos and give us a single, coherent view of our labor market, of transitions, of skills that we need to anticipate. And this will be especially important for the fair transition and skills intelligence observatories. It will also make these insights more visible, not only with the Commission, but also with national policymakers, social partners, and the public. And I hope all agencies will continue to work closely on this to make it a real success. Also, I would refer to important initiatives and how they correlate with Eurofund work for next year. First, the anti-poverty strategy. We will launch next year the first anti-poverty strategy. And one of the first things that we want to look at is how to strengthen the European Child Guarantee. And Eurofund work in this field is and will continue to be very helpful. With your next Quality of Life survey, it will help us follow up on the strategy as well. Then the second initiative that is very important for 2026 is the Fair Labor Mobility Package, where we want to combat fraud, and we want to, with the help of the package, we want to be able to tackle abuse, to tackle social dumping, to tackle elements related to subcontracting chains that lead to social abuse and social dumping. So I want to praise Eurofund's research on safety standards and working conditions in the construction sector, for example, which is really important and guiding our reflection. These are just two beyond quality jobs. These are just two of the priorities that I mentioned for next year. But indeed, we count on Eurofund research on all the priorities of the college. Housing was mentioned here by the Taoiseach as well and by ministers in my bilaterals. Housing is an important priority at European level, but it's crucial in communities, in context of member states. I am also contributing to the work of Commissioner Jorgensen on the affordable housing plan, because I want to be able to deliver solutions for student housing, social housing, homeless people. Of course, the concept is much wider, but we can do things from European level that are relevant. State aid rules, public procurement, financing support, not just exchange of best practices, leveraging private investments as well. So there are a lot of priorities where we create synergy and where I think we can use a lot of Eurofund research and a lot of your work, and we will continue to do so that we serve our European citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a milestone like this that is an occasion to really look back and see how far that we've become. But also it helps us to look forward at the road ahead. The coming decade will test our ability to adapt to demographic shifts, to new technologies, to changing industries, but it will also test our commitment to fairness, to inclusion, and to solidarity. We need to defend and promote our social model, and we need evidence, we need data, we need analysis. Of course, we also need a lot of dialogue, not just social dialogue, first of all, but also dialogue with stakeholders, dialogue between countries and member states. And that's why I treasure so much the work of Eurofund, the context of its work, how it's organized, and how it builds its work and then delivers it. It's an opportunity to restate that evidence-based policy is the best kind of policy, even as we are looking at a landscape that is a bit disruptive, and I come back now a bit to the beginning of my speech to conclude with it. The main challenge that we have on our table discussing the modernizing of our world of work is how we deal with AI, how we deal with algorithmic management, how do we deal with the idea of not just an AI assistant, but AI as a boss, as a team leader. This is the main conversation that is happening at European level right now, and how well we will be able to have simple rules to support innovation, to support our companies, to reap the full benefits of AI, but also remain human-centric and protect the rights of workers. This is the main, I think, conversation, and it's not an easy one, but data is so essential in delivering adequate responses for this conversation. Because, as I said it in one college meeting, because we have a lot of policies that we put forward on digital to simplify, to make it easier for companies to innovate. I said this, we do understand that AI is maybe like the rain or like the sunshine. It's not something that you can avoid. It's just something that you should reap the benefits of. But sometimes you need sunscreen, sometimes you need an umbrella, and sometimes without it you go dry and you die. So not to be very dramatic and exaggerated, but this is, I think, an important start of conversation, and I'm looking forward to having our agencies and your work part of our policy making, because we need it more than ever. Thank you very much. I wish you a very inspirational rest of the day. Sorry that I had to read my speech, but then it helped me deliver a number of the messages that I wanted to. Many of you I know, the rest I will maybe get to know in different contexts throughout this mandate. Count on my support and count on my devotion to our cause, to have a social agenda, not just in Europe, but across, that shows that competitiveness is done through people, by investing in people, and by upholding their rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Now we are breaking into 3 parallel discussions. My colleagues are going to help you direct. Basically, these are in the adjacent rooms. And we will be back at 10 minutes past 12 for the address of the chair of the Employment Committee, Lee Anderson. So, see you in less than an hour here. Somebody? Yeah, okay. Good, we have the microphone. So, sorry to disturb some very nice conversations. I would like to invite you back to the chair so that we can resume our work, which is still continuing. I hope you had an interesting discussions at the 3 parallel panels. And now we are heading to the continuation and then the closing of our event today. So, okay, so thank you very much again for being back to the room. There is one event which happens once per year, which is important for all of us, the agency's directors, and this is to go to pilgrimage at the European Parliament in the Employment Committee, where we are supposed in the generous time allowed by the Employment Committee of 5 to 6 minutes to present how we did, how we performed with the budget, what are our priorities, what are our difficulties, and then to answer questions coming from the members of Parliament. We always take this very seriously, of course, and we prepare very much. And I'm happy that together we have with us the person who is orchestrating this whole event, but not only. Because at least speaking as representative of Eurofound, we are very happy to work very much together with the Committee of Employment and Social Protection of the European Parliament on a number of files that the committee is involved. I mean, recently this was the child guarantee, the housing issues, but also a number of issues related with involvement of people with disabilities, other people that have difficulties with access to the labor market, the green transition, the digital transition, all these big questions that we are doing. And from our side, it's very good that the Parliament is very active on that, because the Parliament is exactly probably one of the most visible institutions of the European Union. So when you have a debate there, it resonates in the member states, and this is the beauty of this institution, and I have huge respect for it, not only because I've been part of it for some time. It's a pleasure to have among us here, and my pleasure and honor to invite to the podium Lee Anderson, who is the chair of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee in the European Parliament. Lee, please.
Thank you very much, Executive Vice President Ivailo, dear friends. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be able to be here and also bring greetings to you from the elected representatives of Europe, from the European Parliament and from the Committee on Employment and Social Affairs. And of course, we are here today to celebrate Eurofound's 50th anniversary, but all of the other agency directors are also here. And we also have the director from EGE here. So I really wanted to start with emphasizing the importance of the work that all of you do in your respective agencies for us and the work that we do in the committee. And we very much appreciate your readiness to provide us with facts and figures and analysis every time we ask, sometimes also in quite a tight schedule. And if I refer back to the nautical comparison that Professor Susskind did about policymakers sitting in a boat in an open sea, research very seldom tell us one right answer to complex problems, right? But research tells us about the different policy options that we as policymakers have in front of us, the consequences and the differences between different policy options. So in a way, I would say that you provide the compass that we need to navigate on this ocean. And I also want to thank you for the inspiration that this event yesterday and today also has provided, because one of the key topics of this foundation was the future of the European social model, right? And I will start with that. I also have a written speech, so no need for Roxana to feel bad. But I really want to start by emphasizing that if there is something that I think we need at this moment in time, it is a positive vision. Because the starting point, I think, when we talk about the European social model is that we need to believe in the European social model. And not accept a thinking where, you know, we think that we have to turn into China or we have to turn into the US to make it in the global competition, but really also to believe in our own strength when we talk about Europe. And all of the speakers that have been speaking during this event have all referred to the very complex global times that we are living in. We see the growth of authoritarianism. We see how the rules-based multilateral order is being challenged and attacked. We are seeing how the global rules for trade and commerce are being rewritten. And we also, of course, in Europe know that still there's millions of Europeans and workers who are really struggling with the cost of living and really struggling with making ends meet. And all of these developments, of course, also affect workers and affect working life. I had the honor also a few weeks ago to be chairing the Parliament delegation to the UN World Social Summit. A visit that was extremely interesting, but also a bit depressing. Because I think the message we got there was that although there's been a lot of progress when we talk about social development, if we look decades back in time, of course, a lot of good things has happened. What we were told also is that we are clearly now witnessing stalled progress and also backsliding when we look at just recent history and the moment that we are in now. So it also, I think, shows that all of these global developments also have negative consequences when we talk about workers, when we talk about working life, and when we talk about social rights. We are also not immune to this development in Europe. We are also in some European countries seeing backsliding. We are seeing social rights being challenged. We are also seeing social dialogue being challenged. So therefore, I think it's important to stop and reflect on this moment, because I do really think it is a crucial moment in time in history, and also the time when we should be focusing on what the core of the European project, the core of the European social model then really should be about. Because my personal impression is also that sometimes within the EU, we kind of forget the big promises that it has and the big potential. And then when we look outside of the EU, we're actually seeing people taking to the streets in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova, to defend the European project and what the values that it stands for. So for me, the European project has never been about just competition or just defense or just digital capabilities or energy. These have always been elements of it, of course. But really the core of it, I think, is about rule of law, about democracy, human rights, but also about trust and about people. It's about equality. It is about quality jobs and safe working conditions. And it is based on an idea of a social model that, for example, promotes collective bargaining for improving productivity and reducing societal inequalities. And as a part of our progressive response to all of these worrying developments around the world, I think we must emphasize that the social model, this core, of course, must continue to be the heart of the European project. It has given us a competitive advantage by ensuring quality of life, social mobility, economic equality, and these are also areas where we perform well against our global competitors, but at the same time, these elements are often overlooked when we talk about competitiveness. And remembering that this is not just a project for Europe, and I was very happy to hear also our Executive Vice President referring to this as a global task, also a global task for Europe. Because the world is also screaming for voices, emphasizing the importance of the social agenda, of social rights, democracy, rule of law, and international law, human rights, in a global context. And I think Europe has a huge role to play and a huge potential to be a strong global actor, talking about the same values that we work for within the European Union. I also have a tendency to remind my colleagues, also when we talk about policy making, about the fact that we must remember there's also a strong popular support and popular demand for a strong social Europe and a strong social agenda. And what I usually refer to is a Eurobarometer that was published just after the European elections, where they asked citizens in the European Union, why did you vote in the last European election? And looking at the reasons, the average for all of the EU, the number one reason was the cost of living. And I think that actually sends a very important message to decision makers within the European Union during this mandate, because if there is a disconnect between what people expect from policymakers, the reasons for why they engage in parliamentary democracy, and a disconnect between what the parliamentary democracy then delivers for them, that kind of disconnect can create mistrust in the whole political system, also mistrust that feeds in to the support of parties or movements that are anti-systemic, so not respecting the rules and the fundamental values of our common projects. And I think this is also important to remember when we talk about the competitiveness agenda. And I know that I'm preaching to the already convinced, I guess, in this room. But I still think it is important to emphasize that our social model is not a problem or a regulatory burden. It's our competitive advantage. And looking to these reports that have been published, we talk about the Letter report or the Draghi report, this is very clear, also in these reports. Draghi, for example, emphasizes this point. He warns European decision makers for not repeating the mistakes of the US when it comes to the social model. He emphasizes that competitiveness cannot be understood as wage cuts, but really should be seen as relying on skills and technological development, as we have heard also from the professor here today. And I think in addition to this, when we talk about the competitiveness agenda, I do also think that we need more talk about what educational and social investment then could mean at this point in time. Coming from a country in the Nordics, I think we have a tendency also to, when we talk about the welfare state, you know, we want to have all these examples of social innovation that we have done. But usually when we do the list, we have to go very far back in time. I was talking about the introduction of free school meals in Finland in the 40s here yesterday. And that's a bit of a depressing picture, right? Because we would also need current day examples, knowledge sharing, best practices on what works when we talk about social investment, when we talk about employment policy and educational policy. And also in this work, we of course need research. So it's not enough to talk about that we need to increase investment, but we also need to invest in the right way. My home country, Finland, when we had the best results in terms of learning outcomes in our educational system, we were never the biggest spender. So of course you have to have a sufficient level of investment, but you also need to know where to put the money, so to say, what kind of social or educational policies that you need to enact at the same time as you invest. So, what else do we in the committee expect from the future when talking about the social agenda and social Europe? We are, of course, awaiting the Commission's Quality Jobs Roadmap, which was already mentioned will be published in the beginning of next month, followed by the Quality Jobs Act next year. We're also waiting for the mobility package, hopefully with a suggestion to strengthen the European Labour Authority, introduction of ESPAS, initiative to improve skills recognition and portability within the European Union. And as we see it in the committee, we have no time to waste now when it comes to the social agenda, as we also last week got a very important confirmation of the EU's competence and possibilities to act when it comes to enhancing working conditions, living wages, and quality jobs. And I'm, of course, referring to the landmark decision by the European Court of Justice regarding the Minimum Wage Directive adopted in 2022, since the court upheld the directive almost in its entirety. And this sends a very clear and important message, firstly, to the European workers. I think they have the right, they have the opportunities to continue to demand and work for living wages, to strengthen fundamental rights of workers, collective bargaining and social dialogue. And this is also a European issue. For member states, it sends an important issue and message on there has to be no more waiting. So we wish for all the member states to follow in the footsteps of Ireland and also do the national action plans when it comes to social dialogue and transpose the Minimum Wage Directive. And for policymakers in Europe, the message is also very clear. Yes, we can use binding legislation to secure adequate minimum wages and to enhance collective bargaining. So, once again, despite the minor weakening, the core of this directive remains unchanged, and all of the parts regarding collective bargaining also remained unchanged. Although this directive has only been in force for quite a short while, it has already reduced wage differences within the EU and also increased the lowest wages, especially in many Eastern European countries. And more importantly, even I would say, is the target of at least 80% collective agreement coverage, because this has also already initiated processes in a lot of member states to achieve this goal, and also to analyze what type of structural changes different countries would need to be able to enhance social dialogue and collective bargaining. And I think this is one of the politically most important parts of this directive, because it has also created a positive discourse around social dialogue and collective bargaining. It has set a benchmark, and it has also given us a tool to be pushing for social dialogue and collective bargaining in other legislative processes and initiatives. One of these will be the reform of the Public Procurement Directive, which is also anticipated for next year. This is also an important priority for our committee. Why? Because this directive involves major public funding, more than 2 trillion euros every year, when we talk about public procurement. And that is why it's also a very important place actually to push for quality jobs and fair working conditions. We want to make sure that companies that submit abnormally low bids, violate working conditions or safety legislation, or undermine trade unions could be excluded from procurement processes more clearly than now, because we have seen too many situations in member states where procurers have tried to do this, but then lost later in court. So we think that this is a place for the EU to put an end to deterioration of wages and working conditions by making public contracts conditional upon collective agreements and respect for workers' rights. And this is also important from a gender equality point of view, since when we talk about public procurement, we also often talk about services that are procured in sectors that are predominantly female worker-dominated. The other very concrete issue I want to touch upon before I finish is, of course, the question of AI and algorithmic management in working life that we've heard a lot about here. I think all of the European Union member states are faced with the same issues. Everybody knows the potential that new technology brings with it, but also recognizes that there are risks. And we want to maximize the good and minimize the bad. It's really that simple, I would say. And since this is an example of an issue that is affecting all member states, we just got data to the committee that approximately 40% already of workers in the EU are working in places where you have at least one algorithmic management tools in place. In the US, the numbers are way higher, and it's clear that we are not going in an opposite direction from the US in this regard, but the development is towards increasing these types of management tools and this type of technology. So we do think that one set of joint rules to protect workers' rights is a better option than 27 different solutions. And the first step in this process was the Platform Work Directive from last mandate, setting, I think, an important benchmark on data protection, data gathering when it comes to workers and working life. And what we are calling for now in the committee, after a vote of 41 in favor and 6 votes against, which is a very strong mandate, is to have a general directive on AI in the labor markets, using the rules already included in the Platform Work Directive. AI in the workplace is also a good example of good cooperation between Eurofound and the EMPL committee. Eurofound has contributed to the quality of parliamentary debate in several manners by being invited in our hearings, providing insightful expertise, information notes with case studies, brief analysis of legislation, also to the rapporteur and the shadow rapporteurs working on this INL. And I know that Eurofound also contributed to the Parliamentary Research Service study, providing your data and on the basis of the results of the European Working Conditions Survey. And all of this has been very useful and I think also very influential actually when looking at the final vote outcome regarding this file. So friends, to end, in complex, insecure and challenging times, we need to focus on what is most important, and that is the people, not only of this continent, but also of the people more globally. Reducing poverty, supporting affordable housing, delivering quality jobs in every sector and every region, enforcing social dialogue and collective bargaining is about creating a society that... Thank you. I was just coming to the crescendo, so it was it was good support. But it's about creating a society that not only respects every member, but also really strives to invest and acknowledge the human capital of each and every member of society. We have a saying in Finland, I think, that when you are a small country with a small people, you cannot afford challenging competition for the speakers in this room. So I will end with a quote from Finland. We usually say that when you're a small country and a small people, you cannot afford to lose a single member of your society. And I think that the same rule goes for Europe at this crucial time. We cannot afford to lose a single member of the European society, and to ensure that, we really need to invest, take care, and develop the European social model. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lee. And again, this is the voice of the legislator, so this is almost like the voice of God. So that's, let's see how it's going to go ahead, but I'm very impressed also by the very ambitious agenda that the committee has and the parliament has, and very happy that this is very much citizen-centric. Now we are going to move to our final panel, which is also going to be very interesting. I would like to invite Lucinda Creighton, who is a former Minister for Europe of Ireland, currently CEO of Vulcan Consulting, somebody very knowledgeable about how the European mechanisms work. And Lucinda, you are going to present the panelists. Please.
Just make sure this is working. Great. Avalo, thank you very much for the warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome all to Dublin on this beautiful sunny day. The seagulls are very excited, as you can hear. I'm delighted to introduce this final concluding panel. We have an excellent lineup, and the topic is the role of social partners in reclaiming the European social model. So a pretty tall order, and I think we have about 40 minutes to do it. So I'm going to invite on stage to reclaim the European social model Salvatore Mara, who is Head of European and International Policies at Siegel and Executive Committee Member of ETUC. Maxime Cerruti, Director of Social Affairs at Business Europe. Maria Jepsen, Deputy Director at Eurofound, and Arlene McCarthy, who is former MEP, Executive Director, AMC Strategy, and Special Advisor at Bloomberg. So a fantastic lineup, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion. So I think given that this panel is charged with focusing on the role of the social partners, it would be good to kick off with the social partners. So maybe Salvatore, as you're next to me, it's a big topic. So how do you, from your perspective, see the role of the social partners in strengthening, deepening the European social model at a time when, perhaps focus and priorities risk being elsewhere? So how do we marry the various goals that face the European Union in terms of competitiveness, international geopolitics, and so on? What is the role of the social partners?
Thank you for this possibility to address you today. First of all, I'd like to say to, of course, Ivailo and all the Eurofound people that workers are proud of Eurofound. We are part of, we feel really part of the family, and we really feel the responsibility and proud of being part of tripartism. There has never been a time where tripartism, to already answer your question, has been so important. It's a moment where multilateralism is strongly under attack, and there's never been a time where we as workers feel the need to defend multilateral institutions, and tripartite institutions like Eurofound play a key role. So thank you, Eurofound, and 50 more years of success. It's absolutely important for working people in Europe. I'll go straight to the point. Well, they are telling us in this geopolitical turmoil that we need to be more competitive. Who will say no? Trade unions will never say no. We absolutely need to be more competitive and more productive when it comes to workplaces. But I'll be provocative here. Have we not learned the lesson of austerity already? There's been austerity in this continent. And countries like Greece, Portugal, this country already paid a huge price when they told us, well, you cannot afford anymore your social model. You have to cut on collective bargaining. You have to cut on wages. You have to cut on social rights because this will make your countries more competitive. Well, this was a wrong recipe. And it's Eurofound data and other institutions that told us so. Because it was proved that when they decided with the memoranda in Greece of the Troika to disrupt, for instance, collective bargaining, the country did not become more competitive. It was only people who paid the price. It was only workers who paid the price. So I think that's a very important lesson. This is why we as trade unions keep saying that the social model, that the tripartism, that the reforms that are made together by the social partners with the institutions are the reforms that will work better, and they will work both for the companies and for the unions. And I will conclude with one very concrete example. And it's this one. Look at Eurofound's data and look at the global rights index of the International Trade Union Confederation. Look at the top ranking countries in terms of respect of social rights, of collective bargaining, of trade unions. Those countries are the most competitive. It's not the ones where the trade unionists are in jail or there are strikes that are banned, etc. So it's a clear and simple message. The social model is absolutely the key to have a competitive Europe and not the contrary. So we will do our best, and we are, again, as I said, very proud of being part of Eurofound as tripartite institutions, because this is where we can really shape reforms that are useful for us, working people, and for the companies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Strong, provocative, and we'll come back to the sort of reforms that you have alluded to in a moment. But I think it would be good to hear from your perspective, Maxime, on the side of Business Europe, the employers, the industries and business that I suppose are, in a sense, expected to do a lot of the heavy lifting on competitiveness. Where do you see the role of the social partners, and is that role of workers as important as Salvatore has outlined?
Thanks a lot, Lucinda, and good morning to all of you. It's also a pleasure for me to be in this Eurofound forum. I used to be involved already in the years 2007 and following for a number of years quite directly in Eurofound activities, more closely than I am now, but I am very much remembering these times with a lot of good memories, and it's been a pleasure to meet again some people here that I know from this period, and to see that Eurofound today is really playing its role, and having an event like that is of course contributing to highlight the visibility and the role that Eurofound can play. So I support fully what Salvatore just said on the importance of tripartism, and I think it was very clear through the evening yesterday as well that we are all in the same boat in Eurofound, and that through the dialogue, through the cooperation, and the understanding of the different needs, but also the role of Eurofound being to provide facts so that then the government and social partners can use them in a good way is really something that we value. On today's panel, I'd like to first reflect a little bit on what we heard from Daniel Susskind. Then I would like also to share a little bit my impressions about what we received from Eurofound as a basis for today's gathering in the note that we received before. And then I will be commenting a bit on what I think is important for the way forward. So on the first part, it was of course very thought-provoking and well-built argument and presented by Daniel Susskind yesterday evening and this morning, but I want to also highlight some differences in what I heard with what I think Eurofound should be focusing on. I think one of the key messages that was coming out of Daniel Susskind's presentation was around the role of work, and highlighting that we need to be prepared in a society in future where work would play less of a role than it has been over the very long term and up until today. And of course, he was raising this from the perspective of distributing growth and how it's going to be organized in the future when work is less prominent in organizing this. And I think Eurofound has a very important role to highlight the importance of work. And I think we as social partners, we are convinced about that. And I think the governments also need to support this, because work needs to be in the future. And I think what is really the core of what we are discussing here is how are we going to use technology as humans in work situations in a good way, so that it's going to serve at the same time increase productivity of labor, and at the same time, of course, create the possibilities for having social dialogue, collective bargaining, play its role to improve the working conditions. So I think this is what we really need to focus on, how to achieve this good synergy in technology and human beings. And I think it should not be about saying humans, we are good for emotional work because we are made of bodies and soul, and that the machines can replace everything else. I think we need to be really focusing on each aspect of what is in the skills of people. And it is about the manual work, it is about the cognitive work, it is about the emotional dimension. And for all of this, we need to understand what is best done by humans and what is best done by the AI technology, for example. And so there is a future for us, because it is about this tripartism and what we do bipartite, how to organize this in a good way. Then the point on the Eurofound's report, or the note that we received, I mean, there is this perspective which is central, and this is a key message that we have heard in different ways yesterday evening and today, which is the social model is basically an enhancing factor for competitiveness. And on this, I want to nuance it. I mean, yes, we are all attached and we all understand the benefits of having social policies in place because people need it and because it is important to also support the labor markets and make sure that we do the best with the people we have. So employers included, we are part of that. Now, we also need to be more precise. I mean, in the around 30% of GDP that is being invested and spent on the social policies in Europe, I think we need to be better and more open in discussing what works and what works less. And there is also a big role for the facts to tell us where are we effective in using the resources to best effect in reaching the objectives that we share, economically and socially objectives that are going to make us stronger. And on this, I think Eurofound has an important role to bring the facts. We should not start from a premise that is really a principle based that has no exception. I think we need to be a bit more granular in understanding what is today the welfare state, how does it work in different member states, what is the effectiveness of the use of resources to achieve our goals, and there is room to improve. So there is room to say less effective on such measures, more effective. It's also about what is most needed and less needed when we have an aging population, when we have, of course, needs which are evolving realities. But it's also about focusing our resource where it is going to make most of the difference. And that leads me a bit to a comment on what Salvatore said. I mean, austerity is not the practice of today. I mean, we see that the governments, they are doing their best in using their resource. There has been a lot of additional spending in the response to COVID. We have seen debts increasing to a large extent. And of course, it is important to have strong public finances. But now it is not about cutting for cutting. It is about making sure that we have the public resource where it can be and where it is going to strengthen, but at the same time be realistic on what is possible. So I think there is room, but this room for Eurofound, in future, it's really about being a bit more specific about what within the social policy segment is improving our competitiveness and productivity. And on this, I think there is also the connection with others. For example, CEDEFOP is with us today. There are tools which may be worked in common because the skills is, of course, part of the response. I think the ERM, the restructuring monitor, the jobs monitor, which have been there for many years, provide good information. But now that the Commission is announcing that they are going to work on skills intelligence, we need to make sure that all this data is really going to improve, the basis on which governments and social partners can then provide the measures through the policies and the collective bargaining. And my last word is perhaps to say collective bargaining has a key role to play. We all know that there is a diversity of practice in the member states, but I think as such, the value of the collective bargaining is to be nearer to the economic reality and to be nearer to the workers. And we need to have social and labor laws in the member states in a way that is encouraging more space for collective bargaining solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot to consider there. We will come back to some of it. But Maria, I'd like to bring you in. I think there's been a lot of praise, rightly, for Eurofound and the excellent research and data that it provides to inform policy making and to, I suppose, to strengthen European policymakers' work around the European social model. And I think both MEP Anderson and now Maxime have talked about effective use of resources and targeting of resources and ensuring that policies, are fit for purpose. Do you see an enhanced role for Eurofound in that provision of that evidence-based research, that data to inform, future decision-making in Europe around the European social model?
I can only answer yes to that, can't I? Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think this is what we're trying to do on a continuous basis, is trying to understand, where is it that we can provide evidence for policymakers to move forward. And listening in on the discussions that we've had today and right now, I'm going to cite some data, but it's not going to be Eurofound data. I'm going to go to Eurobarometer data as well, because yesterday we talked about, we know what some of the solutions are, but finally, what we're going to do also depends on what citizens want, right? So Eurobarometer is a place where you can go and see what do citizens want. And what really astounded me is that this dichotomy, which is not really a dichotomy between competitiveness and the European social model or the well-being of the citizens, is not a dichotomy. It can be put forward as a dichotomy. Here we're discussing it as something that goes together. And when we ask the European citizens about it, for them, both of them say that EU policy action should be with regard to action to support fairness across social groups and gender, and help to industry to become more competitive and decarbonize. Now, when you ask European citizens about these two items, they have the same kind of percentage. So 35% of the citizens think that the actions to support fairness across social groups, and 36% of the population thinks that help should be given to industries to become more competitive. So basically what I'm trying to say is like, both of these items are equally important for EU citizens, right? So there's not one or the other. And I think that comes back to what citizens want. And when we look at, then they ask you, okay, so what are the values that are embodied by the EU? They talk about fundamental rights as the most important. They talk about the freedom of speech and the social quality and the well-being of the population. So these are fundamental values that EU citizens expect to be delivered on. So I can't see how the European Union or the member states cannot deliver on all these items, on the competitiveness, but also on the well-being of the citizens. So if we look at a little bit of the conversation we had here, we basically have a trilemma, right? So we've got competitiveness, we've got the well-being, and we got the environment. Now, the environment was not mentioned a lot today, but it was mentioned a lot yesterday. So I put it, we have a trilemma. So what are the to kind of solve this trilemma, what do we do? Technology was one of the issues, one of the items that were put on the table. And the other item that's being put on the table today here is the European social model as a way of resolving or absorbing this trilemma that we're facing, responding to the expectations and the requests of the European population. Now, and that's where we come in to say, like, okay, but what exactly, if technology is going to solve some of the issues, what is then the role of the European social model? And I think when we look at this European social model, it is not a static entity. It has always evolved. If we go back to the Rome Treaty and we see how the understanding of what a European social model is, it has evolved immensely. The instruments that we've used to promote the European social model has evolved immensely. I also think a new element that has become a demonstration of this is lately the importance of housing in this discussion around what a social model should actually deliver on, whereas a couple of years ago, this was something, it was in the European Pillar of Social Rights, but it was not really on the agenda. Today, it's very much on the agenda, and it's linked to the cost of living crisis and so forth. So I think that this entity of the European social model, it evolves as new challenges arise. And what you were saying, Maxime, is that we need to focus on where is it we need to action today? And I think that's the challenge, is because the challenges are so multidimensional and they're very holistic, is to kind of concentrate and say, okay, this is where we need to hone in and do much better. And I think on the labor market, as was said early on today, the labor market is really strong. But this strength in the labor market has not been fully translated back into poverty, into in-work poverty, where we're kind of stagnating. So while we've been able to do good things in the labor market, on the other side, on the poverty, we've done much less. We haven't been able to kind of resolve the issues on the poverty side as one would expect with such a labor market as we have today. So there are things going on with regard to policy that we still need to look into. And for this to happen, and here it's a plea, and what we all often jump into at Eurofound is that when we try to figure out what policies work and they don't work, there are very few public policies that are actually evaluated. And the evaluations are not always of a high quality. So if you want to know exactly what to do and where you can do an effective intervention, there has to be a little bit more policy evaluation that takes place. And that's maybe a very nerdy kind of request, but it is one that can actually help us to move forward and provide even more and better evidence in terms of what works and what does not work.
I think that's a really important point, policy evaluation and also impact assessments. And I think impact assessments are less focused and rigorous than they used to be in terms of the impact of all forms of regulatory frameworks and legislative initiatives at European level as well. So there's work to be done there, I think, to reprioritize the evaluation of the effectiveness of both policies and regulation. Arlene, you are a geopolitical expert, so I know that you're going to bring all this, bring all this together for us. But a question. We have I think, a social model in Europe that we are proud of. That's not to say it's perfect and that it doesn't require attention, particularly in the context of geopolitical changes and shifts. We see an increasingly polarized world. And we also see and hear increasingly criticism of the European social model from some of our global partners, like the United States, for example, where there is a sentiment, rightly or wrongly, that American taxpayers fund Europe's security and defense, allowing Europe to spend on other priorities like the European social model. So there is a tension there that is growing and poses potentially a risk. Is that something that you see, that you feel, and how should Europe address that, do you think?
Well, can I just reinforce the point about data and evidence-based policy making? And I say that as someone who works for Michael Bloomberg, who's a global philanthropist, and everything and every project and program that's done through the Bloomberg Foundation is evidence-based and data-driven. And the reason that's important in the social policy field is because with the rise of populism, that's an evidence-free zone. And in fact, you can demonstrate very clearly, I think last week with the announcement around the Europe's Globalization Fund, that 81% of workers have now found jobs again through that. So that's an action-based program that's delivering in the social policy field. So I just wanted to make that point because I think it's important as we have attacks on the social model. And I think it's also important to underline, Lucinda, that neither the letter or the Draghi report single out the social model as an issue. Not at all, in fact. In fact, they say it's critical and fundamental to delivering competitiveness. From my perspective, just briefly before I touch on the geopolitics, I think the major problem that Europe has, and where business is actually unhappy, and I know that because I speak to global business, is being tackled in terms of overregulation. It's the overregulation, the burden of regulation, that is making us anti-competitive vis-a-vis other, the US and China. But that's not in the social policy field. That's in issues like AI, which is critical, and we now see the Commission this week rolling back on some of those AI policies because they realize it's not going to deliver a European Silicon Valley. So I think that the other area that I've worked in for many years is finance. And again, we see that, and I am going to be critical of the European Commission on this front, is that we've been talking for 10 years about a capital markets union, and now we've rebranded it. It's being called the Savings and Investment Union. But the bottom line is we don't have, unlike the US, we don't have venture capital. We are totally reliant on banks to lend money to innovative companies or startups, and banks are not lending or taking that kind of risk. And so I think really we need to have a better combination between private and public capital to do that. I think the onus is on governments really to support that. But if we look at the geopolitical field, I don't want to send everybody home with a sense of doom because in a sense, we now are very complacent about talking about the Ukraine crisis, trade tariffs. One of my colleagues, a Bloomberg chief economist, has just given us an intervention to global CEOs in Singapore. And his speech was, we're facing a new world disorder. But it's not just Ukraine. Putin's now looking at an eastern front. We've got India and Pakistan skirmishes. We've got Cambodia and Thailand, now tension. We've got China and Taiwan. Some people will say that China will probably invade Taiwan within the next 2 years. What does that mean for the semiconductor industry? What does that mean for the supply chain, for critical minerals. Again, we see the Commission acting now, saying they're going to collectively pull together in terms of supply of critical minerals, but too late. It's always too late and too little. And I have to be critical about that because we've seen the writing on the wall for quite a long time. And that's why the US looks at us particularly. They'll look at European business particularly will look at, do I want to invest? Do I want to invest in the EU? They'll see it as high indebtedness, high taxes. Actually, not the social policy, the social model is not their problem. But they see overspending. Now they see the fact that, as you said, Jacinda, that Trump is now adding tariffs, which are coming very close to what happened in the Second World War, when we had complete, a lack of any global trade system at all. So we're heading towards a precipice in some of those areas. And I think they also see that we now have to pay for our own security. Where are we going to find $2 trillion for defense? Because that's what we have to spend. We need $2 trillion to do that. And again, that comes back to why do all our pensions and savings, which of course is the objective of the Savings and Investment Union in Europe, why is that all still going abroad? None of it is invested back in Europe. So we have a lot of work to do, but I would argue, personally, that, that skilled workers, a skilled workforce, that a good social model, a strong social model, enabling our workforce to actually embrace AI and be a part of that is fundamental to tackling some of those problems and to attracting investment from elsewhere. Otherwise, we're faced in the longer term now, with an Asian system that is fundamentally superior to ours, China that we can never catch up with, and the US retreating, not spending money on security, and focusing on its own workforce and its own industry.
We could very quickly become very, very gloomy, and yeah. I'm conscious that this is the concluding panel, so we're going to try and maybe focus on some of the answers or some of the solutions. So one positive that I'm taking away from everybody's contribution is that the European social model is not the problem. It may not be perfect, but it is something that I think we as Europeans value, and it is not a hindrance to our competitiveness. So I suppose we've got about 10 minutes left, and I know people have to catch flights and so on. So very quickly, to sort of bring some of this together, I'd like to ask the panel, and feel free to contribute from your perspective and your, taking into account your experience. So what are the reforms, and Salvatore, you alluded in your introductory remarks to the sort of the opportunity and the need for reform when it comes to the social partners and the trilateral approach. So what are the sort of reforms that can make social partnership and collaboration between the social partners more effective, more nimble? And I'll bring into that question digitization, AI, because I get very frustrated when it's framed as a threat, when in fact AI is an enabler. And actually, if Europe can accelerate and be ahead of the rest, maybe not ahead, but at least compete and keep up with the rest, it is a huge opportunity for the workforce. It's a huge opportunity to deliver efficiencies in our social model. So what are the sort of the changes that you would like to see to make that happen, to secure the European social model in this very challenging geopolitical environment? So please jump in.
Thank you. Thank you. No? Sorry. Okay, this is working again. Who am I to contradict Professor Susskind? He concluded yesterday on an optimistic note. He concluded today on an optimistic note. And I would not be a unionist if I would not deliver a sense of optimism. This would contradict the mission of unionism today in the world in such grim times, because we can of course not neglect that we are through very turbulent times. Before reforms, we need something else, if I may. We need investments. It's absolutely crucial that the European Union talks about investments. This is I believe Maxime will be with me on this, crucial for companies to thrive. We need public and private investments, and we need the appropriate reforms to accompany the growth with all the limitations we heard from the understanding of growth these days from Professor Susskind. But, and here I have a question, innovation depends on us as well, on companies, and I will talk about Italy here. In my country, in the last 6 years, companies have been redistributing 80% of the profits to their shareholders and have not invested in innovation and technology. What did Professor Susskind tell us before? He told us, forget it. The problem is not the social model. USA thrived because they have invested in technology and innovation. And this is why they have been very successful. Have we done the same? Have we done the same in Europe? No. Can we be very honest about it? We haven't done enough in terms of investing in innovation. And again, when I said, Maxime, it was not to contradict you before, but when I said, have we not learned the message of austerity, it was not about coming back to austerity or not. I don't think it's the topic of today. It's rather about, and I think we agree on that because you said it as well, we need ownership of reforms of the social partners, bipartite, in the bipartite setting, but also in the tripartite setting. We need to reform things together. And there is a proof there, again, and I will make another concrete example. How many lives have we saved during COVID with our bipartite agreement at the workplaces not to have the virus spread and kill people? That was an example, in my opinion, that we have to keep in our heads. And the lesson we learned after COVID, not only in terms of managing the crisis, but also of having these unique instrument, which is Next Generation EU. Now the question to me is rather, what do we do after Next Generation EU? Your companies need Next Generation EU or an instrument like that. And we need Next Generation EU, and we need the data Maria was just referring to shape the kind of investments and the kind of reforms. So, and I return to my first point, tripartism, multilateralism, more needed than ever. Before asking what, I think we have to ask ourselves how. And the tripartite way of addressing reforms and making innovation also in the AI and in the technology revolution happen is absolutely cooperation amongst social partners and the institutions.
So on my side, a few concluding words as well. I mean, I'll be concrete and I'll try to give ideas of concrete things that could be done. The first thing is, I think Eurofound is best placed to look into occupational mobility. And we have a lot of developments pointing to more restructurings, more companies maybe in the situation of laying off people. And these people will need to be supported in finding jobs in other sectors, maybe adapt their skill sets. So our effectiveness in dealing with this is important now. I have also in mind that, of course, in the partnerships with others, ELA is best placed to look into geographical mobility. But the two are linked, occupational, geographical mobility. And so this is an area where we need to make some progress in having the facts in a good way and supporting effective policy intervention at EU and national level. Another example that is, I think, important is, of course, relating to skills. And on this, I just want to flag that on the employer side, we play a key role in that. 90% of the training is paid for by employers. We do so because we believe in the need and the added value there is for employers, as well as in the social partnership being important for the workers. There is this 60% target in the pillar of social rights action plan. We are today at around 40%. If we want to increase 20 percentage points, we need to do better. And on this, we are calling on the Commission to invest 15% of the European Social Fund in the next programming period for incentives to employers to better invest in the training of their workforce. And the last thing I want to highlight is, you mentioned, I think, Arlene, the importance of regulations. I mean, of course, it is not directly for Eurofound, but I think it is a key point for the Commission to also have a vehicle for regulatory burdens reduction when it comes to social directives. And so far we have not seen a lot on that, and in the next year it will be an important priority for us. And the last thing is, of course, Salvatore, I agree with you that it is about investments and reforms. And indeed, we need to see more about what the Commission will do next, because it's not fully clear yet. But we have already indications with the multi-annual financial framework of mid-July. It needs to be made clearer. We have a role as social partners in this process. So we are looking forward to cooperation. Recently, there was a macroeconomic dialogue. And in that context, the Danish presidency was highlighting that between 3 and 4% additional GDP is possible if we do the right reforms on labor markets. Thank you.
Just a point, I mean, on the investment in skills, the assumption, I mean, the 15% target for the European Social Fund, I mean, that's one thing, but it's really a drop in the ocean. I mean, it sort of goes back to Arlene's point, does it not, about the need for a proper capital markets union and investment in European companies to be able to enable them to invest properly in skills as well. So I sometimes think in Europe we always default to governments, the European Commission, you know, the sort of state sector can always provide the solution, when in fact we really need to mobilize the private sector to be able to do that too.
We do, but I think the other point, Lucinda, is that figure I saw last week, which I was quite shocked by, is that not completing the internal market is the equivalent of a 45% tariff barrier.
Yes.
It's enormous.
Yes.
And so, you know, in a sense, my call to action would be to member states now. You know, they need to step up. They need to coordinate better. They need to create the kind of atmosphere for these strategic alliances to cooperate and to actually deliver better on AI skills, because we'll never catch up with the US unless we really make it a priority. And that does mean you have to involve the social partners, business and social partners together, because at the end of the day, we're training people for these new jobs, and we're training them with the skills they need. And I think if you train people and you give them the education, my experience is they're motivated, and particularly young people, they want to be a part of Europe's success. They're not a part of it if they're ignored and are on the fringes and not able to participate in this new model.
Yeah. A question to all, perhaps Maria. The question of lifelong learning is really key here as well, because it's not just young people, and you know the disruption that is coming with AI, which has so many benefits. It will disproportionately affect middle-aged and older workers, and so there's a real necessity if we want to continue to have social cohesion and avoid the sort of polarization that we see in a micro sense in certain European member states at the moment. We also see amplified in other parts of the world. It's how do we keep those people involved, motivated part of the workforce, and really feeling they're part of this European social model?
I'm really glad for that question, because I was kind of figuring out how I was going to sneak in my last point where we were, but this is really spot on. So going from the lifelong learning, so what we know is that lifelong learning is basically taken up by those who already have the skills, right? So the lower skilled and the older workers engage much less in lifelong learning. And we've known that for years. And the question is, how can you convince people that have a very strained relationship with training and education, convince them that this is a good thing for them? Like, I don't think we found the silver bullet yet, but there are ways of doing it. But it's a little bit more tailor-made. But so I think that the lifelong learning, we've been talking about it for years and years and years and years, and we're still not there. And we know exactly what the problems are. Like, we know that the people that really need lifelong learning are not taking it up, and we need to get them into it. But so once people have the skills and they've got the training and they've got their lifelong learning, they get to the workplace, right? And this is where I wanted to go. Of course, Eurofound, our surveys on the European Company Survey and the European Working Conditions Survey, what we need to do as well in these transitions, these fundamental transitions, is to ensure that we have a workforce that is engaged and that can actually engage at the workplace. And I think that a lot of the research that we've been doing at Eurofound really points to the fact that we know what the kind of mechanisms that you have to put into a workplace to get this engaged, motivated, and indirectly then productive workers in the workplace. And from the European Working Conditions Survey, we clearly identified that we need the people-centered workplace, which provides autonomy, working time flexibility, skills utilization and development, ways of expressing their voice via trade unions and more indirectly. That provides the motivation, the engagement, and it also has a positive effect on the company performance on various indicators. And when we look into the European working conditions, what we see is also what we do identify is that the higher job quality, the more motivated and engaged workforce you have, and the more easy, I would say, it is for the company then to make these transitions, to introduce disruptive technologies, because if they have a workforce that is engaged and can engage with it and feel that they are being heard, then transitions could go smoother, I would say, in that sense. So your question on lifelong learning and getting the right skill sets really is also how that can be used at the workplace afterwards. And there I think that we've got a lot of evidence now in terms of what are kind of the framework conditions for a workforce to be able to engage more smoothly into these transitions that we're going through. And I think that's maybe not that's a point where we think that we need to reconsider in the light of the digitalization of a workplace. What does that actually mean? How does this actually play out? And that's what we're looking into at the moment, is exactly how this plays out in a positive. And as you said, Maxime, how can this be? Where are the positive experiences? And I think right now, what we see of the European Working Conditions Survey is that it's not a negative experience. They get more tasks and they engage it, but it's not being perceived as something negative.
It's all about adaptability and nimbleness. We have run over time, so this felt very, very fast. I could stay here and discuss this all day. So thank you so much to the panelists. You've really, I think, stimulated a lot of thought, conversation, and hopefully it'll continue as people continue on for the rest of the day. So thank you very, very much, and I really enjoyed that discussion and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucinda, and all the panelists for this last panel. We came to the conclusion of our forum now, and I hope that we succeeded to make what we tried at Eurofound when thinking about it to organize. This was to create a platform to bring together very bright minds and to provide the environment for an exchange of thoughts and ideas. And I think that worked, at least to me. Very interesting interventions, very interesting people, very high level also decision makers speeches that show the direction of what we should and we could expect. For us, that was the purpose of the forum, and I want to thank all of you for being part of it. And we do it every 4 years. Probably in the next 4 years, we are going to reflect about the lessons from this one and think about the next one. But I think we have plenty of food for thought after this forum. We talked very much about Europe, and of course, that's what is very much a preoccupation that all of us we have. I'll bring to your mind something which is probably a bit banalized, a Chinese proverb saying never miss a good crisis. I think to me one of the images which is going to remain after this forum is going to be these two images that Daniel Susskind showed. whether we are moving on a rail track or we're in the open sea. In his case, the sea was quite calm. I'm afraid ours is not that calm. It's quite rough and choppy. But this is up to us, that we are thinking, analyzing, to the decision makers at European, at national level, to decide what are the best really solutions for the very visible challenges that we see, and the very intense appearance of new challenges and the changes of the environment of the European Union. Of course, we cannot speak about long-term stability of policies in such an environment, but it's very important to have the flexibility and to have some northern star or some guiding light, what is the general direction we want to go to. And again, for us, we have lots of arguments that together with, and I think the Executive Vice President said it best, I mean, the competitiveness and the social model are practically the two sides of the same coin. So we have to see how we can better promote these two in order to get further. Thank you very much to all of you who are here today. Also, I would like to thank very much to all of those who joined online, because the plenary sessions were also broadcasted online. I hope you are going to go back home with some thoughts and ideas from this forum. That's going to be the most beneficial effect of it. And I'm looking forward to seeing, not in a long time ahead, the management board members of Eurofound sitting in Loughlinstown and starting our work on the management board. Before that, please have some coffee, some quick lunch, and the buses for Eurofound are going to leave in about 2:15. The idea is to start there at 3 or 3:15, the work of the Executive Board. Again, thank you very much for being here with us today. Thank you very much.